The apartment at 74 Driftwood Avenue in Scarborough, Ontario, smelled like mold, cheap curry and boiled lentils stretched too thin for too many mouths. Marcus DeShawn Carter was born into that smell on a cold February morning in 2001, the third child of a woman named Priya Carter who worked double shifts at a laundromat on Lawrence Avenue East and still couldn't keep the electricity bill paid past the 15th of every month. His father, Raymond Carter, left when Marcus was 6 years old, not dramatically, not loudly. He just didn't come home one Tuesday and never came back. Marcus grew up sharing a twin mattress with his older brother Darius in a room with a window that didn't fully close, sleeping through Toronto winters with a coat on top of his blanket because the radiator only worked when it felt like it. By the time Marcus was 10 years old, he already understood something most adults spend their whole lives avoiding, that poverty isn't just a financial condition, it is a weight that presses down on your chest every single morning before you even open your eyes. But what happens when a boy raised in that kind of darkness decides, at just 10 years old, that he will never accept it as his destiny? There were mornings in that apartment on Driftwood Avenue when breakfast meant nothing. Not because Priya Carter didn't care, but because there was simply nothing to offer. Marcus remembered one specific Thursday morning in November 2011, when he was 10 years old, opening the refrigerator before school and finding a half-empty bottle of ketchup, a container of old rice, and a single egg. He closed the refrigerator quietly so he wouldn't wake his mother, who had worked until 3 a.m. the night before. He went to school that day with an empty stomach and sat through an entire morning of lessons at Joseph Howe's Senior Public School, while his stomach growled loud enough for the girl beside him, a girl named Amara, to notice and look away to spare him the embarrassment. That moment, that small, silent act of shame, burned itself into Marcus's memory permanently. He didn't cry about it. He didn't tell anyone. He just sat up straighter, clenched his jaw, and made a decision inside his 10-year-old chest that felt bigger than anything he'd ever felt before. He was going to make sure that feeling never owned him again. That single moment of hunger became the fuel that would one day drive Marcus to earn more in a month than his mother made in an entire year. Scarborough in the 2010s had its own world, its own economy, its own rules, and its own way of swallowing young men whole before they ever had a chance to discover who they were. Marcus watched it happen to people he loved. His cousin Terrell, 4 years older and sharp as anyone Marcus had ever known, got pulled into the streets at 16 and was caught up in the Scarborough court system by the time he was 18. Marcus's childhood best friend, a lanky kid named Devon who could solve math problems faster than the teacher, dropped out of R.H. King Academy at 17 because his family needed income immediately, not in 4 years after a diploma, but right now, this week. Marcus felt the pull too. He felt it every time someone near the plaza offered him easy money, every time school felt completely irrelevant against a backdrop of real survival. But something in Marcus, some stubborn, unreasonable fire, refused to let him step off the curb. He would stand at the edge, look down that road, and then turn around and walk back to the apartment on Driftwood Avenue, back to the thin mattress, back to the hunger, and back to his own private promise. Every person who said, "There's no way out of Scarborough," had no idea that the boy walking past them every single day had already decided to prove them all wrong. If Marcus Carter had one reason to fight, it walked around in a pair of swollen feet inside worn-down shoes. Priya Carter was 41 years old, but looked closer to 55. Not from laziness or neglect, but from the specific kind of aging that only comes from hard, relentless, thankless physical labor done in service of keeping children alive. Marcus would sometimes watch his mother come home at 11 p.m. after a double shift, watch her sit down on the edge of her bed and take off her shoes slowly, massaging her own feet in the dark because she didn't want to wake anyone. He would pretend to be asleep. Watching through the cracked bedroom door, memorizing the image of those hands, cracked at the knuckles, calloused at the palms, hands that had washed other people's laundry for over a decade and still couldn't afford to buy Marcus a pair of new sneakers for his 16th birthday. He didn't resent her. Not even close. He loved her with a fierce, almost painful love. But he made a vow the night he watched her rub her feet in the dark, a specific, detailed, concrete vow that before he turned 25, Priya Carter would never work another shift she didn't choose to work. The image of his mother's hands in the dark became the single most powerful motivator Marcus would carry for the next decade of his life. Marcus attended R.H. King Academy in Scarborough, a school that was underfunded, overcrowded and staffed by a rotating mix of teachers who were either deeply dedicated or completely checked out. In 9th grade, a guidance counselor named Mr. Patterson called Marcus into his office after Marcus scored 96% on a standardized mathematics assessment and told him, and these were the words Marcus would remember for the rest of his life: "That's a strong score for someone in your situation, Marcus, but let's be realistic. Have you considered a trades apprenticeship? Not university, not college, a trades apprenticeship." Marcus stared at Mr. Patterson for a full 4 seconds, something he later described in precise detail, and then said very quietly, "Thank you," stood up, walked out, and never went back to that office. Instead, he went to the school library, pulled every book on business and entrepreneurship he could find off the shelves, and began educating himself with a ferocity that had nothing to do with the curriculum and everything to do with a quiet, dignified form of revenge, the kind you serve by becoming exactly what someone said you couldn't be. Sometimes the person who tells you that you can't do something is the greatest gift the universe will ever give you. At 16, Marcus Carter made his first 47, not from anything that would cost him his future. He made it from shoveling driveways and mowing lawns in a slightly better neighborhood 2 kilometers north of Driftwood Avenue, a neighborhood near Kingston Road where the houses had actual yards and actual driveways that filled with snow. He had borrowed a neighbor's snow shovel, knocked on 14 doors before anyone said yes, charged $12 per driveway, and by the end of that first freezing Saturday had blisters on both hands and 47 in crumpled bills stuffed in the pocket of his jeans. He sat on a curb on the walk home and counted that money 4 times, not because he thought it might change, but because he needed to feel it. That 47 was the most real thing that had ever happened to him. It wasn't charity, it wasn't luck. He had done something, and the world had responded with money. That exchange, effort for result, felt like discovering a law of physics no one had ever bothered to explain to him. By that winter, he had 9 regular driveway customers and was making $200 to $280 every weekend, which he split, $100 to his mother, the rest into a shoebox under the mattress that he had labeled in permanent marker, "The Way Out." Most people wait for an opportunity. Marcus Carter, at 16 years old, decided to create one with a borrowed snow shovel and 14 knocked doors. 2 weeks after Marcus turned 18, everything he had quietly built collapsed in a single afternoon. His mother, Priya, suffered a mild stroke while working at the laundromat. She survived, but she couldn't work for 4 months, and the medical expenses and lost income gap over the following weeks created a financial hole of nearly $9,800 that their limited resources couldn't cover. Marcus took the shoebox from under the mattress, $1,920 saved over nearly 2 years of driveway shoveling and odd jobs, and handed it to his mother without a word. He then worked 3 simultaneous jobs, stocking shelves at a no-frills grocery store on Morningside Avenue from 5 a.m. to noon, a second shift at a car wash from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., and delivering food via bicycle for a local restaurant 4 nights a week until midnight. He ran on 4 hours of sleep for 3 months. He lost 11 pounds. His eyes developed dark circles so deep they looked bruised. He deferred his community college enrollment at Centennial College, the enrollment he had fought to secure, the one he had been quietly celebrating, and felt the dream move further away like a boat drifting from a dock while he stood unable to jump. He cried exactly once, alone in the car wash parking lot at 6:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. Then he got on his bicycle and went to his next shift. The moment Marcus cried alone in that parking lot was not his breaking point. It was the exact moment he discovered how unbreakable he actually was. It was a YouTube video, of all things, that planted the seed that would eventually change Marcus Carter's life. He was 19, working the grocery store shift. And during a 15-minute break, he sat in the break room scrolling his phone when he stumbled onto a video about dropshipping, the concept of selling products online without holding inventory, acting as a middleman between a supplier and a customer and keeping the margin. He watched that video 3 times in a row. Then he watched 6 more videos over the next week, every spare moment he had, on his bicycle between deliveries, in the car wash break room, on the mattress at midnight with the phone screen dimmed so he wouldn't wake Darius. He had no business training, no mentor, no startup capital beyond 310 Canadian in his checking account. What he had was an understanding of a fundamental truth that the streets of Scarborough had spent years teaching him. Every system has a gap, and the gap is where opportunity lives. He stayed up until 3 a.m. on a March night in 2020, created a free Shopify account with a made-up email address, listed his first product, a portable phone charger sourced from a supplier in Guangzhou, China, for $39.99 CAD, with a wholesale cost of $9.20. Then he went to sleep on the thin mattress in the cold room in the apartment on Driftwood Avenue, and waited. On a broke 19-year-old's cracked phone screen in a break room that smelled like industrial cleaner, the rest of Marcus Carter's life had just quietly begun. The notification came 11 days after Marcus listed his first product. He was on his bicycle, pedaling a delivery through light rain near the University of Toronto's Scarborough campus when his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He couldn't check it immediately. He had a delivery to make. So he spent the next 7 minutes in restrained anxiety before finally locking his bike outside an apartment complex and pulling out his phone with cold, wet hands. The notification read, "You made a sale. 39 tamt 99 CAD. One portable phone charger sold to a man named Daniel in Edmonton, Alberta, someone Marcus had never met and never would meet. His profit on that sale, after product cost and Shopify fees, was approximately $22.40 Canadian. He stood in the rain outside that apartment complex on a Tuesday evening and laughed, a real, full laugh that turned into something closer to a sob before he collected himself, wiped his face, he would later say it was just rain, and stood up straight. He had just made $22 while riding a bicycle, while moving, without trading hours for dollars. That concept, that money could be generated by a system he built rather than by time he sold, rewired something fundamental in his brain in a way that no classroom had ever managed to do. That first $22 profit wasn't just money, it was proof that the life Marcus had always believed was possible actually existed, and he had just touched it with his bare hands. What happened between Marcus's first sale and his first $10,000 CAD month was not glamorous, and he was always careful to say so later. It was 14 months of grinding while holding 2 jobs, learning Facebook and TikTok advertising through free YouTube tutorials. Losing 220 CAD in ad spend he couldn't afford on a product that didn't sell, pivoting to a new product, losing another 170, pivoting again. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, finding a winning product in the home goods niche, a compact LED reading light that he managed to sell to 41 customers in a single week after cracking the right ad targeting on TikTok. He reinvested every dollar of profit. He didn't buy new shoes when his sneakers wore through at the heel. He ate peanut butter sandwiches 6 days a week for lunch to save money. He kept his grocery store job and his car wash job until he absolutely couldn't justify them anymore. He told nobody what he was doing, not Darius, not Devon, not even his mother, because he had learned from the neighborhood that sharing a dream before it becomes real only gives people the opportunity to talk you out of it. He worked in silence, in the margins of an already exhausting life, building something that the people around him couldn't yet see. The version of success that the world would eventually celebrate was being secretly constructed in silence on a cracked phone screen between shifts that nobody remembers. The month was June 2022. Marcus DeShawn Carter was 21 years old. He had been running his online store for over a year and a half, and his best month up to that point had been 3,800 CAD in revenue. Impressive, but not enough to leave his jobs, not enough to feel like freedom. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, almost by accident, he created a short video advertisement for his LED reading light, using only his phone and a free editing app called CapCut. The video was 43 seconds long. It was not professionally produced. But something about it. The way he demonstrated the product honestly against a stack of books, the simple, sincere caption he wrote, connected with people in a way that nothing before had. He put $80 CAD behind it on TikTok ads and went to sleep. He woke up to 1,100 in sales. He put another 250 into the ad. By Wednesday, he had done 4,800 in sales for the week. By the end of June 2022, Marcus Carter's Shopify dashboard showed total revenue of 34,200 CAD for the month, with a net profit of just over 12,500. He sat at the kitchen table on Driftwood Avenue, the same table where he had eaten stretched lentils as a child, and stared at that number on his phone screen for so long the screen locked and went dark before he remembered to breathe. In 1 month, on a phone with a cracked screen he'd been using for 2 years, Marcus Carter earned more money than his mother had made in the last 12 months combined. 3 weeks after his 12,500 profit month, Marcus Carter sat down at that same kitchen table with his mother Priya and told her everything. He told her about the shoebox, he told her about the YouTube video in the break room, he told her about the first 2240 sales standing in the rain. He told her about the 20 he lost on ads he couldn't afford. He told her about waking up to 1,000 zals, and then he opened his phone, opened his bank account, turned it to face her, and let her see the balance. Priya Carter stared at the screen. She looked at her son. She looked back at the screen. And then she did something Marcus said he was entirely unprepared for. She didn't cry, she didn't shout, she didn't hug him immediately. She sat very still for almost a full minute and then said very quietly in a voice barely above a whisper, "I always knew." I just didn't know what form it was going to take. Then she stood up, walked to the stove and started making che, her way always of processing things too large for words. But Marcus noticed for the first time in as long as he could remember that she was humming softly while the water came to boil. He had not heard his mother hum since he was 6 years old. The moment Priya Carter started humming in that kitchen was the moment Marcus knew that every sacrifice, every cold night, every shift had been worth every single second. On November the 1st, 2022, Marcus DeShawn Carter moved out of the apartment at 74 Driftwood Avenue for the first time in his life. He was 21 years old. He didn't move far, only across Toronto to a clean 1-bedroom apartment in the Leslieville neighborhood that cost $1,850 CAD per month. But it might as well have been a different planet. The apartment had a radiator that worked. Windows that actually closed and sealed against the Canadian winter cold. A refrigerator that contained more than ketchup and leftover rice. On his first night in that apartment, Marcus went to the Loblaws on Queen Street East and bought $240 worth of groceries, something that would have been an unimaginable luxury 2 years earlier, and came home and cooked himself a real meal. He sat at his new kitchen table and ate alone, in the quiet, in a warm apartment, and felt something he had no adequate word for, something between peace and victory and grief, all mixed together in his chest at once. He thought about the cold room on Driftwood Avenue. He thought about the coat on top of the blanket. He thought about his mother's feet in the dark. And he made himself sit with all of it because he never wanted to forget where the fuel had come from. The boy who had spent years dreaming of a warm room finally had one, and instead of forgetting the cold, he made himself remember every single detail of it. By early 2023, Marcus was 22, and his business was generating between $18,000 and $25,000 CAD per month in revenue, with net profits ranging from $6,000 to $10,000 after all expenses. He was not rich. By conventional wealth standards, he was solidly lower middle class, with a steep upward trajectory. But the first thing he did, before buying anything for himself beyond basic necessities, was sit down with his mother Priya and tell her that her laundromat days were finished. He set up a monthly e-transfer of $2,500 into her account and sat with her until she agreed to reduce her shifts to part-time and, eventually, by June 2023, to stop working entirely for the first time in over 20 years. He also tracked down Devon, who had dropped out of RH Whirl King at 17, and spent 3 consecutive Saturdays teaching him the basic principles of the business model he had built. Devon launched his own Shopify store 6 months later, and Marcus went back to RH King Academy not to find Mr. Preed Patterson, who had since retired, but to stand in front of a class of 10th graders and speak. He stood at the front of that classroom in his plain grey hoodie and dark jeans, looking almost identical to the boy who had once sat in those seats, and said, "Scarborough is not your ceiling. It is your foundation. Build on it." Marcus Carter had not yet reached the peak of what he would build, but he was already using what he had to pull others up behind him. Marcus DeShawn Carter turned 23 years old on a cold February morning. 23 years after he was born, into the smell of mold and stretched lentils in the apartment on Driftwood Avenue in Scarborough. His business that month crossed 32,000 CAD in monthly revenue for the first time since his June breakthrough, now running on products he had developed direct supplier relationships to source himself, managed with a small remote team of 2 freelance contractors. His mother Priya attended his birthday dinner, a quiet restaurant in Leslieville, nothing extravagant, wearing a new coat that Marcus had bought her, the first new coat she'd had in 12 years. His brother Darius was there, Devon was there, and across the course of that dinner, Marcus said very little about money and quite a lot about what he had genuinely learned, which was simply this: that poverty is loud and convincing, that it speaks in the voices of guidance counselors and cold corners and cracked windows, that it tells you in 1,000 different ways that your story has already been written for you. And the only thing, the single, solitary thing that separates the people who escape from the people who don't, is the willingness to call poverty a liar. To look it in the eye, in its own apartment, on its own terms, and say, "Not me, not today, not ever." Marcus Carter had been saying that since he was 10 years old, standing in front of an open refrigerator in Scarborough that contained nothing but ketchup and old rice. And he had never, not once, stopped. The boy who refused to stay poor didn't win because he was the smartest, the luckiest, or the most talented. He won because he was simply the one who refused to stop.